Hello, guys. Welcome to Psych Minds. It's been a while. If you are new to the channel, you don't know what we do. We generally read our favorites. If you have any suggestions, anything at all, you can reach out in the comment section or in the community sections of the YouTube channel and we can read your favorites. I am back after long. How have you guys been? I have missed you. So we will continue from where we left off. We are reading Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before by Dr. Julie Smith, Chapter 24. How to Calm Anxiety Right Now. If you struggle with anxiety, you are probably hoping for a tip that you can use right now. Something easy to learn that will have instant effects. Many people feel this way at the beginning of therapy. That is why I always teach people this first skill as early as possible. It is easy to learn and takes just a few minutes to bring down the intensity of anxiety. At the very least, it prevents anxiety from escalating into panic. When anxiety is triggered, you start breathing more quickly. This is your body's way of getting in extra oxygen to fuel the survival response. You feel as though you cannot catch your breath, so you breathe faster with rapid, shallow breaths. Then you have an excess of oxygen in your system. If you slow your breathing down, you can calm the body and in turn slow your breathing. Not only this, but if you can extend the out breath so that it is longer or more vigorous than the in breath, this helps to slow your heart rate down. When the pounding heart comes down, so does the anxiety response. Some people like to count the breaths when doing an extended out breath, such as breathing in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11, or a variation that works for you. Taking some time to practice slow breathing techniques is a great investment of time. It's an anxiety management tool that works in the moment. You can do it anywhere, anytime, and nobody even needs to know you are doing it. One of my favorites is square breathing. Just follow the steps below. Toolkit Square Breathing. Step 1. Focus your gaze on something square, a nearby window, door, picture frame, or computer screen. Step 2. Focus your eyes on the bottom left hand corner and as you breathe in, count to 4 and trace your eyes up to the top corner. Step 3. Hold your breath for 4 seconds as you trace your eyes across the top of the other corner. Step 4. As you breathe out, trace your eyes down to the bottom corner, counting to 4 once again. Step 5. Hold for 4 seconds as you move back to the bottom left corner to start again. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds, and hold for 4 seconds. Focusing on something square can act as a guide and help you to keep your attention on the breathing, minimizing the chances of being distracted too soon. If you try it for a few minutes and feel like it's not working yet, keep going. It takes some time for your body to respond. One extra tip is to practice this every day. At times, when you don't feel anxious, when something is well practiced, it is much easier to use when you find yourself overwhelmed with fear. Movement. Another tool that has almost instant effects and requires very little practice to master is exercise. When your anxiety response is triggered, your muscles fill up with oxygen and adrenaline, ready to move fast. If you don't move and burn off that fuel, your body is like a rocket with engines firing and nowhere to go. Bring on the trembling, shaking, sweating, and the urge to pace around the house. Exercise is one of the best anxiety management tools because it follows the natural course of your threat response. Your body is geared up to move. Allow it to do that, and your body can use up that energy and stress hormones it has produced and rebalance. If you have a stressful day, try adding in a short jog outside or an intense half hour with a punch bag. Physical movement will truly relieve your body of the physical stress so that when you sit down to relax, you can feel calm and fall asleep more easily, helping you to replenish further. My extra tip here is that exercise is also a powerful prevention tool. So try to exercise even on the days when you don't feel anxious. This way, you are setting yourself up to have a better day tomorrow. Your mental health will thank you for it. Chapter summary. When anxious, our breathing becomes faster and each breath is more shallow. To calm the body, take slower, deep, deeper breaths. Try to make the out breath longer and more vigorous than the in breath. Give it some time and the anxiety response will begin to drop. That brings us to the end, chapter 25. What to do with anxious thoughts. Like many other kids, in the early 90s, I was allowed to stay up a little later on a Friday evening to watch Casualty, a television show about an accident and emergency department. This particular episode, the only episode I remember to this day, was about a man who lived on the sixth floor of a block of flats. A fire breaks out downstairs and he is trapped. Not long later, I am lying in bed running through it in my mind. What would I do if my house caught on fire? Is the house on fire now? How would I know? What if I wouldn't wake up in the time? Maybe I should try and stay awake. Maybe I should open the bedroom door and check downstairs. I lie there, eyes wide open, trying out different scenarios in my head, imagining waking up my younger sister who was in the room with me, opening the door to a cloud of smoke, opening the windows, and calling for help. Soon the warm glow through the glass panel above my bedroom door started to look more and more like the orange glow of fire. I remained still and silent, unable to move, listening for the crackling sounds and waiting for the smoke. That night, I not only believed that a fire in my home was possible, I saw it happening over and over in my own head. I bought into every scenario as if it were occurring, played it over and over in my head like a movie. When a worrying thought pops into your head, it's like driving past a car accident. You can't not look at it. Thoughts of danger demand your attention for a reason. Your brain is offering up a story for what might be happening, and if there is a chance of the worst case scenario happening, then you had better be prepared. As I explained in a previous chapter, your brain acts a bit like a smoke alarm. Every time you sense a threat in your environment, the alarm gets triggered and tells your body to get into survival mode. That is called your fight or flight response. Your body gears up to either fight off that threat or escape quicker than you ever thought you could move. A smoke alarm is made to go off when there is a fire. Every time you sense a threat in your environment, the alarm gets triggered and tells your body to get into survival mode. So, just like the smoke alarm, anxiety can be triggered even when we are not truly at risk. But when you burn the toast and the smoke alarm sounds, you don't remove the smoke alarm. If you understand why it is there and how it works, you can start to work with it. Make adjustments, open a window. You get the idea? We cannot remove our survival response. We would not want to. But we can learn about what exacerbates it and make adjustments so that we can detect a false alarm and act accordingly. So, get some distance. Thoughts are not facts, they are guesses, stories, memories, ideas, and theories. They are a construct offered to you by your brain as one potential explanation for the sensations you are experiencing right now. We know they are not facts because they are so heavily influenced by your physical state, that is, hormones, blood pressure, heart rate, digestion, hydration, to name just a few, by each of your senses and by your memories of past experiences. So, what does this mean for those anxious thoughts that pop into our heads? It means the power of that thought and any other thought is in how much we buy into it, how much we believe that thought to be true reflections of reality. The best way to break down the power that thoughts have over our emotional state is to first get some distance from them. How do we get distance from something that is inside our head? Getting distance from thoughts can be done in a number of ways. Mindfulness is a great skill to start practicing for building that ability to be able to notice your thoughts and let them pass without getting caught up in them. But being aware of the types of thought biases that tend to arise when we are anxious also helps. If you can notice a thought for what it is, a biased guess, and label it as such, then doing that is one way of holding the thought at arm's distance, arm's length. Your mind can then see it as just one possible perspective. We are then in a much better position to be able to consider alternatives. One way to get that distance from anxious thoughts is to use distanced language. This helps to turn the dial down on the emotion. Rather than saying, I am going to make a fool of myself during the speech, say, I am having thoughts about making a fool of myself. I notice those thoughts trigger feelings of anxiety. I know thinking or speaking in this way may feel awkward at first, but it makes a difference in helping you to step back from the thoughts and see them as an experience, not as you. Another way to get distance from those thoughts, in my personal favorite, is to write them down. This is not exclusive to anxious thoughts, and my personal favorite, this is any time that you want to get some distance and a new perspective on your emotional state or situation. Write down everything you are thinking and feeling. Seeing what you have written on the page can be a powerful way to process and make sense of your experience from a bird's eye view. Spot biased thoughts that make you feel worse. There are a few thought biases that commonly occur when we are feeling anxious. Catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is when your mind jumps to the worst possible scenario and offers it to you as a prediction of what might happen now. It plays that out for you like your own personal horror movie on repeat in your mind. It is one possible prediction, but not only the only one. When we play it over and over in our mind and buy into it as an absolute certainty, anxiety goes up. In a previous chapter, I mentioned my fear of heights growing up and my early attempts to face it. At the top of the learning tower of Pisa, my thoughts that I was about to die were catastrophizing thoughts that were repeated over and over. It turns out they were just one possible ending to that story, as the actual ending went like this: I walked back down the steps and continued with my holiday. Personalizing. Personalizing is when we have some limited or ambiguous information about the world and make it about us. For example, I am walking down the street and see a friend on the other side of the road. I call her name and wave, but she doesn't wave back. Immediately, my personalizing thought tells me that she must hate me. I must have said something to offend her. Maybe all our friends have been talking about me and I thought I had friends, but now I have none. There are thousands of possible alternatives to that story. My mind has offered as an explanation for this. Maybe she didn't hear me. Maybe she normally wears contact lenses. Maybe she has just had a huge daydreaming, huge fight at home, and can't bear to speak to anyone in case she burst into tears in the street. Maybe she was daydreaming. The list goes on and on. The personalizing bias demands our attention because it is threat focused. If my friends suddenly hate me, this is something I need to focus on. Mental filter. The mental filter is that tendency for us to hold on to all the information that makes us feel worse and neglect all the information that could help us feel differently. Let's say you post something on social media and you get 50 comments. 49 of those comments are positive and encouraging. One is negative and points out something that you are already felt insecure about. The mental filter is when we focus our attention on that one negative comment and neglect to consider the other 49. The mental filter was definitely at play when I focused in on the fact that the learning tower of Pisa was leaning and failing and failed to consider that it has remained standing for hundreds of years and has a large team of professionals constantly monitoring its safety. The brain naturally wants to focus on the threatening information because its job is to keep us safe. If we are already stressed or anxious, then the brain will do that even more. The brain receives the information from the body that all is not well and starts scanning the environment and your memory for possible reasons. This is when the mental filter clicks into action. Your brain is on a mission to make sense of the anxiety symptoms. But if we can notice that mental filter in action, we can recognize the bias in the information we are focusing on and intentionally choosing to consider the other information available. Overgeneralizing. Overgeneralizing is when we take one experience and apply it to all the experiences. If you interview for a job and get turned down, overgeneralizing thoughts would sound like, I'm never going to get a job, so what's the point of applying for anything else? Or after a breakup, I screw up every relationship, so I'm not going to date ever again. Overgeneralizing makes anxiety worse for a couple of reasons. It leads to a more intense spike of emotion because it turns one problem into a bigger life problem. Secondly, it often leads us to avoid the situation in the future, which feeds anxiety and makes it much harder to face. Labeling. Labeling is similar to overgeneralizing but involves taking one event or period of time and using that to make global judgments about who you are as a person. So, if you experience a period of anxiety in your life, and from that point label yourself as an anxious person, you start to form a concept for yourself and your identity, which then impacts on how you expect to feel and behave in the future. Each emotion, behavior, and period in our lives is temporary and not necessarily a reflection of who we are permanently. So, when you notice that you are labeling yourself as a certain type of person, don't let it go unchecked. Doing so has an impact on the emotions that are constructed by your own brain in the future. Instead, acknowledge the specifics of the experience as a temporary one helps to distance you as a person from the experience that you encounter along the way. It's much harder to change an identity as an anxious person than it is to simply reduce anxiety. Fact check. Since the power of any thought is in how much we believe it to be true reflection of reality, thought challenging can be a helpful process for many. If a thought is causing you distress, it makes sense to work out whether it is fake news or worth feeling so anxious about. Thought challenging is a simple process. When you start, it's easier to do in hindsight after the event has passed. If you notice anxious thoughts, you can follow these steps to challenge them. 1. Write down the anxious thought. 2. Draw a line down the center of your page to make two columns. Like a lawyer weighing up the facts, write down a list of all the evidence that the thought is true fact, and evidence only counts if it would stand up in court as evidence. Third, in the second column, list all the evidences that the thought is not a fact. If the exercise reveals the anxious thought to be less factual than you initially believe, then it is a good time to start considering alternative ways to think about the situation. This exercise is very simple but can be very helpful to just loosen our initial belief in the thought and open up the opportunity to consider alternative interpretations. However, if you find this just leads to an internal argument about how true the thought is, that is when this technique becomes less helpful. If that happens, leave that thought challenging exercise and instead use the other techniques that focus on distancing yourself from the thought. Spotlight of attention. If New Year's Day 2010, I am pulling on a crusty blue boiler suit and zipping it up at the front with my eyes closed, I take a deep breath as if it's going to be the last breath I take. I feel sick. I wipe the sweat from my palms down the front of the boiler suit. I open my eyes and Matthew is grinning at me. Ready? His smile is so wide he looks like he has a hanger in his mouth. I do not smile back. No. I take another breath and my shoulders lift. They stay up high and tense as I breathe out through pursed lips. Why on earth did I agree to do this? We move towards the door leading to the underside of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I start nodding my head and telling myself I can do this. We move out onto the narrow metal grating and I can see through it to the ground. Some profanities leave my mouth and I grip tightly onto the metal bars on either side. I want to cry. Matt asks if I'm alright and tells me to keep moving forward. His words are like a match to a flame and I snap back at him. I'm moving. Whose fucking idea was this? I hate this. Then I realize I'm still only on the underside of the bridge and it's only getting worse. When we get up onto the steps to climb the bridge, the muscles in my legs are shaking so violently that they hurt already. I'm vaguely aware that I'm making quiet noises that are somewhere between whimpering and groaning. I know there is no way back, so I keep putting one foot in front of the other. As we reach the top of the bridge, 134 meters high, the guide stops and turns. Why is he stopping? Why is he stopping? More profanities under the breath. He says something about the view, and I'm not interested. He then asks us all to turn around and look behind us. I don't want to take either of my hands off the metal bars, and I have been gripping. So I turn my body as much as I can without letting go. That's when I see Matt kneeling down, holding out a ring box. The tears were already there, ready to roll. I have managed to let go of the bars for a split second so I can turn around fully before gripping them again. All the way through our beautiful movement, my hands remained tightly gripped to the handrail. The group applauded and start moving forward to cross the center of the bridge and come down the other side. We take a moment to talk. I start asking about how we have managed to arrange this. He explains as we walk across the center of the bridge and scale back down the steps on the other side. I'm smiling and laughing and shaking my head. Matt explains that family who lives here in Sydney and his family members who came on the trip with us are all watching from the restaurant opposite the steps we are descending on. I look across and see them all waving. I wave back with one hand and hold the ring up with the other. Then I realize I'm not holding on. I haven't been holding on the whole way down. Our brains take in and process a lot of information every second of every day. But the world around us offers infinite amounts of information. If your brain was to try and process everything, you would not be able to function. So the brain makes choices about what to focus on. Our attention is like a spotlight. We have control of that spotlight, but we can't control the actors who come on stage. We can't control how long they spend there, what they say, or when they leave. What we get to do is to focus that spotlight on one or two of them at a time. If we settle our focus on the anxious thoughts that tell stories of worst case scenarios and images of you not coping, they get the chance to feed back to the brain that all is not well. When you shift the spotlight of your attention to other thoughts on the stage that offers a different story, they will have their influence on your bodily reactions too. While you are focusing on them, the other thoughts may not leave the stage. They may stick around waiting for the spotlight again, but without it, they have less power over you, over your emotional state. The story of my engagement is rather an extreme example, but one that has stayed with me on the power of the focus of attention. All the way up the bridge, I was focused on how I might accidentally die that day. All the way down, I was focused on living. Of course, we can't rely on a surprise proposal to shift our attention away from our catastrophizing thoughts every day. But exercising the power to direct your spotlight of attention is a powerful tool. It is not same as blocking thoughts out. As soon as you try to eliminate a thought from your mind and not have it at all, the thought pops up more than ever. This is how people get stuck in loops with intrusive thoughts. If you are not willing to have it, you will. By thinking about how you don't want to have those anxious thoughts, you are directing your spotlight onto them. When you choose to move the spotlight onto the other thoughts, the anxious thoughts may remain on the stage. You are still aware of their presence, but they are not the star of the show. When those anxious thoughts arise and you put the spotlight on them and start to ruminate over that feared event in the future, doing so causes your body to respond. Not only that, each time that you play out the worst case scenario in your mind of something awful happening and you not coping with it, you are constructing an experience that your mind uses to help build your concept or templates for the world. The more you repeat that, the easier it becomes for your brain to recreate it. When you direct the spotlight of your attention helps to construct your experience. So, learning to take control of that spotlight is truly an investment in your future emotional experiences of the world. So, what if there are no other actors on the stage? How do we choose what else to think when we are well practiced at worrying? So, what to focus on instead? A new self talk. Anxious thoughts are threat focused. When we spend time with them, they feed back to your body and brain to ramp up that threat response. To turn the dial down on that threat response, we instead need to cultivate a thought stream that promotes calm. When my son had an operation at the age of 2.5 and the swelling of his face caused his eyes to seal shut, he awoke from a nap, unable to open his eyes. He could hear all the strange sounds of the high dependency units, lots of beeping machines, footsteps, and voices he didn't recognize. His threat response fired up and he screamed for me. He was inconsolable until I arrived back in the room, held my hands on his, and spoke to him. I could not make him see, I could not change his pain, I did not have any magic word to make it all go away. I simply spoke calmly in his ear, letting him know that I was there and he was safe. The person who had his back was here and going nowhere. From that moment on, his ability to accept and move through this frightening situation was nothing short of extraordinary. Over the next few days, his eyes remained closed, but he continued with life. Playing with his toys and enjoying himself, compassion had helped him to feel safe. It turns the dial, feel safe enough to face the world even when all was not okay. When we receive kindness and compassion, it turns the dial down on our threat response and allows us to feel safer. This happens when the kindness comes from another person or from our own thoughts. Changing the way you speak to yourself changes your brain chemistry and your emotional state. It is not easy. One day of self compassion is not going to overturn a lifetime of practicing self criticism and self attack. It is a life practice that needs constant work, but it can be life changing. Remember, compassion is not always the easy thing. It is not saying there is nothing to be scared of. It is the coach in your ear with a calm and firm voice that is encouraging you, supporting you, reminding you that you can and will move through this moment. One of my favorite ways to turn my attention to compassionate thought process is to ask myself, if I was coaching a friend through this, what would I say and how would I say it? The best kind of coach is not one who swoops in to rescue you, but one who is honest with you and encourages you to find the strength within yourself to move through difficult moments so that you may discover your own strength. Reframing. At the end of clinical training, I had to undergo a Viva exam. This is an exam that is more like an interview in which you sit in front of a panel of experts and answer questions on your research. On the day of my exam, I arrived at the university and entered the waiting room where we had to sit before we were called in. As I sat there listening to my heart pound, a fellow trainee returned to the waiting room with tears streaming down her face. She was sobbing as a member of staff put an arm around her shoulders and led her out of the waiting room. All remaining pairs of eyes in the waiting room widened and looked at each other in terror. Something jumped in all our stomachs. I stood up and moved out of the room, passing a tutor who wished me luck. Then he gave me one of the best pieces of advice I ever received. He told me to try and enjoy the exam. He told me that this was an opportunity to show off everything I had learned and worked on during these years of training. He said this was the one and only time that anyone would read the entirety of my thesis and show genuine interest in it. So it was my chance to enjoy sharing that interest. I returned to the waiting room, nodding and smiling. What I didn't recognize until I was on safer ground was how he had helped me to reframe the entire experience. Nothing changed about the high pressure situation I was facing, but I went from a rabbit in headlight to creating an experience that included a mix of courage, pleasure, and excitement. In the same way that my Viva exam was reframed from a risk to a challenge, you can use this same technique with other experiences that you might otherwise interpret as a threat or something you can't cope with. Reframing does not mean that you deny the inherent risks in a given situation. There was still a risk of failing my exam. But if I chose to focus exclusively on that risk, then my stress response might have been much higher and I probably would have found it much more difficult to perform. True. Reframing is when you allow yourself to consider reinterpreting the situation in a way that is going to help you move through it. Reframing an experience as a challenge can help us to shift from the flight urge to a somewhat more controlled fight urge. We can move towards something with intention. The next step can help to put reframing into place. Consider values and identity. When anxious thoughts are dominating the spotlight, we need to bring on stage the thoughts about what matters most to us. It makes sense to base some decisions on fear if your life is at risk. That is when you based when those thoughts are most valuable to us. But life becomes more rich and full when we make our decisions based on our values and what matters most. An easy way to do this is to come back to questions such as, why is this so important to me? In a year from now, when I look back on this moment, what actions on or response would make me proud and grateful? What kind of person do I want to be in this situation? What do I want to stand for? Your values can become a part of your identity too. Whether you want to be an adventurous person or a fit and healthy person or a sociable and friendly person, being clear on that can help you bring forward an alternative set of thoughts to the anxious one. If you feel anxious about starting a conversation, but you have decided that you are going to see yourself as someone who is sociable and friendly, this helps to create a template, a concept for how you will behave in social situations, even when anxiety is whispering in your ears to avoid conversation. Or perhaps I choose my identity to be someone who lives with courage. Then I can ask myself how I would respond to this situation. What would my next move be if it was based on courage? What response would make me proud to write in my journal tonight and look back on this time next year? That brings us to the end. Chapter summary. Get some distance from the anxious thoughts by labeling the biases when you spot them. Remember that even when anxious thoughts demand constant attention, you can control the spotlight of your attention. Kindness turns the dial down on your threat response, whether that kindness comes from someone else or inside your own head. Reframing a threat as a challenge invites us to be courageous. Act in line with your values so that you are basing your decisions on what matters most, not on fear. We will continue with our next chapter, chapter 26, in our next reading, which will be tomorrow. Bye bye for now. If you have any questions, you can reach out related to this content, or you have any recommendations, suggestions for other readings that I must do. If you have any favorites that you want me to read, anything at all, you can reach out to me in the comment section. If you have any questions regarding anything at all, if it is even outside what we are talking about, the books and everything, you can reach out definitely. Bye bye for now. If you are new to the channel, you have not subscribed, you are a reader, but like don't, you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe, like, and share if you like. And if you have friends who listen to audiobooks, bye bye for now. Take care. Keep reading. Hoping to be regular now. Bye. Take care.